Um, I'm not going to read Rebecca's bio that was in the newsletter. Rebecca, I appreciate you sending that to us. Thank you very much. But I do remember the first time Rebecca came to the Dilworth neighborhood grill, and I have these memories of us being particularly rowdy that day. And I was afraid we had alienated her to the point of no return. So I reached out to her shortly after that just to make sure that we were still on speaking terms from a club perspective, and I was overjoyed to learn that she was. It's always good to have new members joining our club, and when Rebecca expressed an interest in becoming a Rotarian, I was thrilled. She spent almost 10 years conducting Alzheimer's research at Emory University in successively challenging roles. She moved to Charlotte, began a different career path, but she wanted to get involved in service projects as well. I'm really thrilled to report that, as Kelly mentioned, service. Here we have this very new, very young Rotarian who's already participated in several projects, including sorting meds at MedAssist and volunteering at Promising Pages, among the volunteer activities that she's pursued. She spends her free time exploring Charlotte's neighborhoods with her husband and two dogs, an English lab, and a Great Pyrenees mix. And she's passionate about many things, according to her bio on her Realtor website. But those include, most importantly, building genuine relationships, and I think most importantly, enjoying dessert before dinner. So without any further ado, Rebecca Taff, welcome. We look forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you. I'm just so glad you did your research on me. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I am so excited. As he mentioned, I am no longer doing Alzheimer's research, but I did it for a long time. And so when I was putting together the presentation, my heart was swelling, but then I was going down all these different rabbit holes, like, should I go this way or this way? And I could speak on this for hours. So I tried to keep it a little bit more concise, and hopefully we'll have time at the end for questions in case I didn't touch on what you were hoping I would touch on, but we'll see. All right, so can everybody see my screen? Okay, awesome. So again, I'm Rebecca Taff, and today I'm going to talk about Alzheimer's disease and the research that's being done and where we stand with it today. So I'll do a little bit of an introduction on myself and how I got involved with the research and why you should listen to a young little tyke like me. And I'll go over a brief overview of what Alzheimer's is in case you're not familiar, what we know causes it, what you can do to prevent it, and then where research stands today and what you can do to help further research, and then hopefully some questions. So full disclosure, I am not a doctor. I'm not a medical provider. I, again, don't even work in this field anymore, but I did for almost 10 years. So I picked up a thing or two. So in the 10 years that I was working in Alzheimer's research, I would draw blood from participants, and I would learn how to process and analyze the results of that blood. Same thing with, I would process spinal fluid. I wouldn't draw the spinal fluid, but the spinal fluid is the fluid that surrounds your brain and is incredibly helpful in diagnosing Alzheimer's disease. I can interpret study protocols and the procedures that are outlined in them. I know how to perform and analyze EKGs, so where you put the little nodes all over to measure your heart. I can calculate drug infusion rates, and I am very intimately familiar with performing the diagnostic neuropsychological exams. I performed over 10,000 in the span of my career, and that's a lot because they each take an hour, and it's a very important piece, but it's one of the more difficult pieces. So I could do a whole presentation on that alone. I did work for both Emory University And then I actually started at Indiana University in their academic institutions on over 100 phase 2 and phase 3 medicinal treatment interventions. I did do one phase 1, but it was a light therapy, which didn't go very far, and it was a lot different. So I've traveled as far as California for informational meetings on study conventions or treatment study conventions and research. I'm still in touch with my past caregivers of participants, colleagues, and mentors, and I just try to stay in the loop on research and current findings. And then I lost my grandmother in February of 2020 to Alzheimer's, so I also know that aspect of how the emotional toll works and can speak on that as well. So I know a little bit. So I wanted to start with just this term dementia, because a lot of people use Alzheimer's and dementia synonymously, but they don't mean the same thing. So dementia is an umbrella term, and then all these different forms of dementia fall underneath. So Alzheimer's is the most prevalent. It affects 60 to 80% of people that are diagnosed with dementia, but there are other forms as well. But Alzheimer's disease specifically is by definition, a progressive neurodegenerative disorder that causes memory loss in people over the age of 60. So progressive, meaning that it continues to worsen as time goes on. Neurodegenerative, which is just a fancy word for affecting the central nervous system, so your brain and your spinal cord. And then memory loss is interesting because people exhibit it in so many different ways. So it's not always easy to pick up on what memory loss is for patient A versus patient B, etc. And then over the age of 60, there have been diagnoses as young as age 30, and that's younger onset, not early onset, but I will touch on that in just a minute. And so what causes Alzheimer's? So we know it's a combination of things, usually lifestyle, environment, and genetics, but we do know in terms of biological makeup that it's caused by amyloid plaques and tau tangles. So we first learned that these amyloid plaques would build up on your neurons and basically just deteriorate and eat away at your brain. Therefore, your brain isn't able to function in full capacity. So then we learned that it was also being caused by these tau tangles, where your neurons get all tangled up in these little tiny balls and don't know how to send their messages, and causes lots of confusion in the brain. And so we know that there are the 3 main stages of Alzheimer's disease. So early onset is the very beginning stage. It's when you first start noticing symptoms or noticing a change in yourself, or maybe a loved one notices it in you. This is different than young onset. So those terms are also used synonymously sometimes, but it is different. So anybody diagnosed or anybody noticing changes younger than 60 is young onset, and then early onset is 60 and above. And then after early onset, your symptoms might continue to progress, and that then becomes MCI, which is mild cognitive impairment. And so your symptoms have worsened, but your neurologist might not be able to say for sure that it's Alzheimer's disease. It could be another form of dementia. The etiology is still unclear. And then after time goes, eventually it turns into Alzheimer's disease. So other etiologies have been ruled out. They know it's not FTD. They know it's not vascular or anything else. They know it's Alzheimer's. And the symptoms now are moderate to severe. It affects your daily life, and you're likely relying on someone else a lot more frequently. And so the lovely question of how can I prevent Alzheimer's disease? Everybody wants to know. And of course, there's no proven way to definitely prevent it. There are things you can do to help. So a good rule of thumb is what's good for your heart is good for your head. So no smoking. And I trust everyone here knows that smoking is not okay and we don't do it. That's not a Rotarian thing to do. Limit alcohol intake, stick to a Mediterranean diet. So lots of seafood, fish, lots of veggies, lots of fruits, and limited red meat. Monitor your blood pressure and cholesterol. I know that that is, it's just so common for people to have hypertension or high cholesterol, and it's not necessarily a problem. It's just something you want to make sure that you keep monitoring, and then exercise regularly. All of the neurologists I've ever worked with say 30 minutes a day, which is pretty unrealistic, I think. But, if you really want to strive to do the best, 30 minutes is good. But on that same note, it's just as important to exercise your brain. So limiting TV time, reading when you can, challenge yourself to learn something new every day, play games, work puzzles. Puzzles are one of my favorite things to do. So that's exciting. Learn a new language. There's been lots of studies that have shown that people who are bilingual are significantly less likely to develop Alzheimer's. And then there's Lumosity, which I think is pretty common. It is a paid app, but it's good. I mean, there are free versions out there that are fine too, but Lumosity kind of just houses it all in one place. So if you've heard of that or been thinking about it, I strongly recommend it to anyone and everyone. And then a big one too is just staying social. So since the beginning of the pandemic, there have been more and more studies coming up that show depression and lack of socialization have a direct correlation with Alzheimer's disease. And it's just always encourage someone you know or yourself or what have you to reach out to friends and family, and just do your best to be honest and open, because science has proven that it's a biological predisposition that makes your brain more susceptible to these plaques and tangles, the tau tangles. So it's really important, even though it is uncomfortable and has been very hard over the last 2 years. And then recognizing signs of abnormal memory loss. So memory loss is normal, Kelly. And especially if you're stressed or maybe lacking sleep from having 2 twin babies. But there is a time where it becomes abnormal. And so signs of abnormal memory loss are disruptive memory loss. So not just forgetting some random fact that you think that you should know, but something that actually disrupts your day-to-day routine on a consistent basis. And then disorientation to time or place, because it is important to know the day of the week, or at least be one day off, very close. And I know it gets really tough when you're retired and you just don't have to keep the schedule that you used to have, but it's still important to have a good ballpark idea, and you should really never be disoriented to place. If you are, then talk to someone. And then poor judgment or change in your thinking or thought processes. Of course, we all have our days, but if you are tipping $100 on a $5 bill, and thinking that that is normal and not extra generous, then maybe talk to somebody, because that's not exactly something, especially if you don't have buku bunches of money to be doing that. And then current research and findings. So like I said earlier, we still don't know what the cure is. We're looking for that. And currently there is no cure for Alzheimer's, just treatments for the symptoms. And so for many, many years, our research was focused around these pill form medications designed to remove the plaque that I mentioned. And we learned that we could remove the plaque, but at a certain point, the damage had already been done. And just because the plaque isn't there anymore doesn't mean the brain hasn't deteriorated. And so after that finding, we kind of shifted to focusing on the tau as well as the plaques, and then also moving more towards the infusion form of medicines versus pills. And anti-tau medications or studies are still very, very new. But with the success of aducanumab, the research has again shifted kind of back to plaques. And this time they're focused on prevention as well as elimination. So they're starting it at a much earlier stage of the disease to prevent those plaques from ever forming to deteriorate the brain. And then there have also been studies geared towards contributing factors like reducing inflammation, researching effects of insulin on the brain for people that are diabetic, studying the heart and the head connection, and possible links in hormone therapies, and the list goes on. But by far, the monoclonal antibody studies like aducanumab have proven the most promising at this point in our research. So, there we go. So aducanumab, I'm sure everyone has heard about this because it was big news. It was a big deal. It's the very first FDA approved medicinal treatment for Alzheimer's disease. So this happened last June, and that was when, okay, I'm out. I have seen this through. When I first started in Alzheimer's research in 2012, it was already like coming to the research world. And so I got to see it from the beginning all the way to the end. And it was a huge, huge glimmer of hope and perfect time for me to say, okay, I'm going to do something else now. So it is a monoclonal antibody medicine. So what that means is just it hypes up your immune system and gets it ready to fight. And it is an intravenous infusion. So it's a liquid treatment that goes straight into your veins, your bloodstream via your veins. And it's designed to remove the plaque buildup and then prevent plaque accumulation. It's only approved for, so it is very exciting, but there are like caveats to it that aren't great at all. So it is only approved for people diagnosed with the early onset or very early mild cognitive impairment. So not anyone that has a more severe case or stage of Alzheimer's. It's not currently covered by insurance, which they are hoping to make more of a decision on this in April. But right now it costs anywhere from $28,000 to $56,000 for the drug itself. That doesn't include the other like safety precautions that are required, which are like MRIs and PET scans. And those are very, very important and also very, very expensive. And then it hasn't been proven that it will help slow progression. It just may. And so it's very exciting and it's a huge, huge leap. And it took us 10 years to get here. But we're still very far from where we need to be. So this drug is still considered a provisional approval from the FDA. So Biogen has to keep researching to prove effectiveness, but only lack of efficacy is a concern here. The safety isn't much of a concern at this point. Of course, there will be instances where somebody is allergic and wasn't expecting it to be or what have you, but it's not a safety concern. And then the results to date have remained promising, and preliminary data is showing that the drug is also lowering the tau tangles despite being designed to target the plaques. So that's very exciting too. And then I also wanted to share some of my favorite resources. So alz.org, that's the Alzheimer's Association. They have their big gala coming up here in Charlotte in May. Actually, it might be May 15th. I'm not sure. But they are just a phenomenal resource. I've always said that if I do end up back in the world of working in Alzheimer's, it will be with the Alzheimer's Association, because they're just wonderful people and they provide great, thorough resources for caregivers and for newly diagnosed patients and what have you. And then clinicaltrials.gov. So if you or someone you know is interested in potentially participating in research, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov to see what research studies are happening around you. And by law, every research study has to be listed on this site. So if you were to ever come across one that wasn't listed on that site, then run far, far away very fast. And then, of course, CART. Everybody knows about CART, but okay. And then I left plenty of time for questions.
Sorry, I couldn't get my my thing off. So all right. So why don't we just go down the line? Kevin and then Taylor.
Great. Rebecca, thank you very, very much. That was really, really interesting. Do you have any idea how many people have participated in the research trials for the aducanumab or whatever that is?
Aducanumab.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would have been, gosh, I would say close to 2,000.
Okay. Is this, are you predicting authorization anytime soon, or 10 years seems like a long time?
Yeah, it is. It's such a process. I think it's promising that the data is showing to be successful so far. So it might happen, but it would probably take another couple years.
Wow. Okay.
And things are also just so far behind too, because of, the pandemic. So that's part of it as well.
Hey, thank you again. This was awesome.
Good.
Great. Taylor?
Hi. So I did want to get your thoughts on kind of the process that the FDA went through with this newest drug, because I remember when it came out and the news, it was huge, but there was also very much another story going on about how they decided on whether or not to release this. And I think part of it was the fact that it's not being covered by insurance yet. So they were talking about how Medicare was going to go was going to be go off the charts because of how many people wanted access to the drug. And so how do you balance those as far as your perception of its use?
Yeah. So honestly, Emory didn't even pick up the option of carrying it in their pharmacy because it was going to be so hectic and chaotic. Only the top 1% essentially can afford. The infusions are every month for 1 to 2 hours. So it's just not accessible to so many people. And then the amount of resources that it would also take. So yeah, it's exciting, but it's kind of not, because we're so far from it being accessible to the people that really need it.
Yeah. And just a follow up, have you noted, I know that with the most recent vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, that technology has very much been started to be utilized for lots of other things, because we finally started giving tons and tons of federal money to those projects for the first time. Are you seeing scientists in this field start to try to use that technology for drug use?
So when I was that was starting before the pandemic. Probably those were becoming more and more common around 2019, when we were starting to see a lot of study protocols come out with those, with that technology. I never got to work on one of those studies. So I don't know what the success rate has been. But yeah, that technology isn't necessarily new. And
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I know I know John has a question, Sean has a question, and then Kay May, I have a very similar question to her as well, and Kay, so hopefully, I don't know if this covers anyone else's question, but can you talk about the process to be tested for AD or other types of dementia other than, the typical, president, what's the date? I think there are a lot of, there are a lot of people in our lives that are struggling with similar symptoms. And so what are the best ways to, without taking them into the doctor to getting the full test done, like what are ways that we can start to kind of get an understanding of whether or not our loved ones might be suffering from, some stage of Alzheimer's?
Yeah. So really just educating yourself and your loved ones on what the signs of symptoms of early symptoms are, and just paying, if you have a very strong family history, then paying very close to your baseline is important so that you will notice changes or in your loved ones as things happen. Obviously, early detection is the best chance at fighting it. So yeah, just educating yourself on the symptoms and what to be looking out for. Again, the alz.org website has so many different resources about that that goes into better detail. And but then yeah, like once you just even have an inkling of concern, talk to your PCP, go to get a referral to your neurologist. And then with diagnosing for Alzheimer's specifically, you do have to go through like that hour-long battery of tests of who's the president, what's the date, and then more in depth. And then depending on the results of that, in order to figure out an etiology of what's causing, if it is dementia, what's causing it, your neurologist will recommend a lumbar puncture more than likely. So it's a very, very routine practice, but it's very intimidating as well. So it is a shot for pulling the spinal fluid from your lower back via a needle. It's similar to an epidural in that it's a needle in your low back, but it's typically a much smaller needle, and they're extracting versus putting anything in other than numbing medication. But that fluid is actually how, between that and a PET scan, which PET scans are really expensive and a lot harder to come by, but those are the two ways to actually be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
John, did that answer your question, or, give you a resource?
Mine's kind of a one-off from that. Rebecca, thanks for your presentation. It was really interesting, and I'm very sorry to hear about your grandmother. My grandfather also had the disease, and you made an interesting point about socialization. And it sounds like you may have studied this through the pandemic. I was just curious if, through the grapevine or through looking at statistics, if you saw increased rates of diagnosis through the pandemic because of, lack of socialization, amongst especially older people. It seems like my grandfather really went downhill through the pandemic. He wasn't going places, and I was just curious if you could shed any light on that.
I haven't looked up those statistics specifically. I am just 100% sure that the diagnoses, now that people are going back to in-person visits and everything, I'm sure there's been quite a spike in them. But I don't know the exact numbers on what the increase was. But I mean, it's very important to stay social. So I'm sure that, and stay active. I'm sure that it was a lot, unfortunately.
And they're probably still uncovering it because people still aren't really going back to the doctor, and they're just now starting to kind of come out of hiding. Mr. Behringer.
Mr. Behringer, I think, has been hiding under a rock for many years because my last impression was that with Alzheimer's disease, there could not be a firm diagnosis except were it done post-mortem.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know how old that is. It must be an old
That
thing.
has changed. That
It
has
is.
changed a little. It used to be, yeah, it was never confirmed until autopsy results were reviewed. But with the technology of the PET scans and the lumbar punctures, we've done enough research now to be able to measure the level of plaque in your brain or tau in your brain with that spinal fluid that you can get a diagnosis.
You know, I'm really surprised at, I've read articles just because my family suffers from Alzheimer's. I'm surprised that there aren't more, especially with baby boomers aging up, there aren't more facilities to accommodate people with Alzheimer's and memory disorders. You see these amazing stories about, you know, communities that are being built. So instead of like assisted living or, you know, or full nursing, you know, like nursing homes, you're starting to see these little communities pop up where they're completely enclosed and it looks like a little town within it. And, you know, it's so that, you know, patients can safely live out their days. And I'm just surprised we don't have more of those. Like my grandmother lives in a place that, and we're paying an enormous amount of money for her to live there just because they have a memory unit. And you can only get into that if you are a current resident. So we put, you know, she's there because we're planning ahead. So I'm just surprised that more money isn't being, because a lot of families who have loved ones that are suffering from Alzheimer's do not have the resources to, you know, safely keep them, you know, to keep them safe and keep them from wandering out. And, you know,
Yeah.
it's a lot emotionally too, as a caregiver.
It is. And it's kind of not part of like our system, our healthcare system that I'm proud of, because a big thing is that it just costs so, like a reason that those memory care facilities don't exist is because it costs so much money to do all the like special doors that can only be accessed with this special technology, blah, blah, blah. And B, it is like a lot of red tape around it. And so like people don't want the insurance issues and to potentially be held liable to any degree. And then also with Alzheimer's, people do tend to get combative after a certain stage. And so it's hard to find good employees for those memory care facilities. It's a conglomerate of sad things, mostly money. I'm sure if you paid people better, then they'd be more willing to do the hard work. But yeah,
maybe Disney needs to run these facilities. Like that's pretty much like the people that go to Disney World, you know, combative, you know,
yeah.
they don't care about the insurance. Someone's going to get hurt, you know? So maybe I'll talk to my friends at Disney and be like, hey, y'all need to like be putting these homes together. You've got the funds,
right?
The tolerance, you know, it's a happy place. So, oh, mercy. Who else has questions for Rebecca?
Kelly, can I just add something real quick?
Sure.
So a colleague of mine, her dissertation was on caregiving for, among family members. So with Rebecca's pointing out like the costs, what's really happening is basically a family member is taking on that role as full-time caregiver. And what she was finding in her data was that it's overwhelmingly, if it's a group of siblings, it's overwhelmingly the daughters that are doing it. And so they're basically working full time and taking care of and so it's creating this massive amount of stress because basically a lot of these women are, you know, they've had kids, but their kids are already out. And so they're finally getting like, you know, take a break. And now they're having to take on the role again. And a lot of the brothers are not stepping up. They're happy to give some money, but as far as like watching, right, doing the actual physical labor that is involved, it's not showing up. So she was talking about how it's creating a whole new set of concerns and mental health issues for those caregivers. And this is, you know, this is pre-pandemic, right? So yeah.
And then even on top of that, so especially if you're a caregiver for your spouse, so you're constantly worried about them and everyone around you is worried about them, no one pays attention to you and slowly realizes that you too are slipping mentally. Or if you're the sibling that's taking care of them, then again, you're never filling your cup. And so you're just slowly slipping as well. It's a nasty circle.
Yeah, just similarly to folks who are like our fellow Rotarian who needs his wife needs assistance right now, getting him to appointments. Our caregivers also need breaks, and not just caregivers of adults, but a lot of the children that I used to work with Asperger's syndrome and autism and forms of childhood disability. They are in a childlike state all of their lives, and their parent never gets that break. It's like, it's constant. So finding, ways for caregivers to get out of the house, experience something else, but know that their loved one is safe. Those are also ways that we can be of assistance to our fellow Rotarians and neighbors, is just giving them that mental break to come out. So, Kevin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say again, Rebecca, thank you very much. Your comments about the socialization aspect, I think, are so timely, considering that we're going to be having an opportunity to meet in person next week. So thanks for sharing that, and certainly hoping to see as many people as possible next week.
Yeah, and if anybody needs a ride, like Bob, I don't know what your situation, if you're good, okay, good. If you guys ever feel like you're just not able to drive into the meeting, but you still want to come, reach out to one of us and we'll make sure you get there, because we want to see you in person. So Rebecca,
Minivan.
Yeah, Taylor will pick you up in his minivan, his cool dad
that's right.
van.
Yeah.
Rebecca, do you have any last parting thoughts? There are, interacting with family members with Alzheimer's is a very, very different set of conversations. And you do need kind of like rules around, don't negate, like there's some things. So please look at the alz.org and probably just alz.org is probably the best place to go for those types of, educational pieces. So, because you can definitely upset people if you don't know how to talk to them when they're confused and disoriented. So any other final thoughts?
Not really. I always like to tell people, if you know someone who has Alzheimer's, or you frequently interact with someone who has moderate to severe Alzheimer's, to think of it as the disease as a bookshelf. And so as the disease is progressing, the bookshelf is swaying side to side, and the books are falling out, starting at the top and then moving their way down. And it's getting more aggressive as it sways and the books are falling. But the books at the bottom, the books that are going to stay, are their emotional feelings. And so they might forget what you said. There's a famous quote by Maya Angelou, right? They might forget what you said, but they will never forget the way that you made them feel. Yeah. So just kindness over everything.
Yeah.
And patience. Patience is important.
Rebecca, thank you so much. So much. Woo, claps.
Thank you, guys.
Alrighty.
I was happy to do this.
I think that counts as
Thank
a
you. Go ahead.
classification speech as well.
Oh.
There you go. We've done it. Classification speech. We've not been very good at it during COVID. So, well, I believe that now we are just really on to our 5-way test. So Davis, if you are not familiar with normally Rotary has a 4-way test, set of principles and things we live by. This club has a 5th element, another good movie from the 90s. And let's see, does anyone have them so that, oh, actually I've got them in a little thing. So I'll share my screen so that Davis can see them. You'll eventually learn them because, you know,
I have
You'll
them
hear
pulled
it.
up already
Oh,
because I
perfect,
don't know them. Do
Thank
you want
you.
me to go ahead and share?
yeah, that'd be awesome.
Let me see. Okay, now make sure I share it big enough so you can actually see it.
With Davis having the history of Rotary in his family, he probably knows them better than any of
That's
us.
true. That's
Oh,
true.
boy.
That's
We
cool.
don't ever assume. We don't ever assume.
Can you guys see that okay? Is it big enough?
Well, Davis is younger than me, so it doesn't matter. It's all about what he can see.
So small.
It is small. That's okay. All right. So of all the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the
Is it
truth?
the truth?
Second, is it
Is
fair
it
to
fair
all
to all
concerned?
concerned?
Third, will it build
Will it build
goodwill and
goodwill
better
and better
friendships?
friendships?
Fourth, will it be
Be
beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, will it be
Will it be
fun?
fun?
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. It was great seeing everybody. I can't wait to see as many of you as possible next week in person at the Dilworth Neighborhood Grill, starting around 11:30, program to start at 11:50. And Kevin, who's our program speaker next week?
Our program is, hang on here, we have two speakers next week. We have
that's right, feeding-
Christy Davis from Faith, Hope, and Love Mentoring. And then we have Kim Apro, who is from an organization called Feeding Charlotte. So they're going to share the podium and tell us what they both do. They're both outstanding organizations that I met through for CLT.
Excellent. All right. Well, everybody have a great weekend. I see the sun is shining. You can see the
Okay.
glow on my head. So if you are able to get outside and take a 30-minute walk, keep off those Alzheimer's onset and be good.
Davis, thank you
Bye.
for
Thank
joining
you,
us.
guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. That was a lot of fun and great information, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. See you
Bye,
all next
everybody.
Friday.
Thanks, Kelly.
Bye.